Welcome to today's horror ghost stories. Here is the story, My Dad's Bigfoot Encounter. I want to start off by saying that this story is not mine, but my dad's. To truly understand how eerie this story is, you have to understand who my dad is and how he acts. My dad grew up in Southwest Virginia and has lived there all his life. The part of this area I am mentioning is in the heart of the Appalachian Mountains. He grew up mostly just himself and his sister after their mother left them when they were very little. He never really had a father figure because his father was never really involved in their childhood. Because of this, he spent most of his time taking care of his sister and hunting in the mountains away from his family. He spent probably hundreds of hours in the woods alone throughout all times of the day. It didn't matter if he couldn't sleep at 3 a.m. in the morning. He'd grab his rifle and hike miles back in the woods, find a good spot against a tree, and wait for a deer. The point I'm trying to get across is that he was absolutely not afraid of the woods and did not believe in Appalachian folklore at all. So from here I'll tell this story as he told me from a first-person perspective to avoid confusion. One morning when I was about 18, I woke up around 4 in the morning and couldn't fall back asleep. I laid there trying to doze off, but I was awake and couldn't fight it. I woke up and of course no one was home. Dad was probably still out drunk somewhere, and my sister was probably with friends from the night before. Hunting season had started a few weeks before. This year was different because I didn't have school anymore after I had graduated, so I had all the time in the world to go hunting. I grabbed my rifle, packed some snacks, got some coffee, and dressed warm since it was well into fall at this point. I hopped in my truck and drove to my favorite place to hunt. My uncle had taken me there the year before, and it was the most calm, peaceful, and beautiful spot I had ever hunted in. We went all the time during last year's season. This time I was going alone to just be by myself. I had a lot on my mind as I was deciding whether I wanted to go back to school or just start working to get away from our poverty-ridden town. So I figured sitting in the woods alone was a perfect way to be alone with my thoughts and think about my future. Finally got to the spot around 5 a.m. The place was called Panther Creek and not many people hunted there, so I figured I'd have the whole place to myself. I hiked through the woods and along old abandoned logging roads in the pitch black darkness until I found a spot that looked good. There was a large clearing about 50 yards down the hill from me. I was concealed by the trees on top of the little hill I was on, so I wouldn't have to worry about hiding myself as much. I sat down and finished the last of my coffee and started to wait. Eventually, my inability to sleep earlier caught up with me, and I eventually dozed off by accident. I woke up around 7:30 to crunching leaves, mad that I had wasted all that time sleeping, when deer could have been walking in front of me the whole time. I looked around but didn't see anything, so I figured it was probably a squirrel mad that I was in its area. Luckily, the sun was on its way up, so I could see much clearer than if it had been totally dark. I waited about 45 minutes before a monster buck walked out of the trees and into the clearing. I was shocked at how big this deer was, glad that I was able to find it, but dreading dragging it all the way back down to my truck. I picked up my rifle and aimed as well as I could with a broken scope. I had dropped my rifle the previous year and cracked the eyeglass, but I didn't have enough money to replace it, so it had to work. I lined up the shot and pulled the trigger. Luckily, it had been a clean shot and the buck only ran maybe 20 yards before falling. I tried to look at it with my scope, but it was too cracked and foggy to see the details, so I started digging through my bag to find my binoculars. I eventually found them after having to dump out the majority of my things onto the ground. I turned around and looked at the deer and realized just how big it was. I looked for a little while longer before deciding to start packing up and head down to the deer. Right when I had put my binoculars back in my bag, I heard a loud snap of a tree branch down past the deer. At first I thought it was another deer, so I turned and looked. The snapping and crunching of leaves and branches should have been my first warning that this wasn't a deer. Exploding out of the tree line came this large, hairy creature running on 2 legs. It was a dark brown, reddish color. I was kind of shocked at first, trying to understand what I was looking at. Its hair was matted and dirty. I tried to reason with myself that it was a bear, but it didn't make sense. It ran on 2 legs, not on 4 like a bear. It ran down the hill across from me towards the deer I had just shot. It moved incredibly fast for how large it was. As soon as it got to the deer, it looked at it and let out this gut-wrenching scream that sent a shiver down my back. Just the look of it made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. It grabbed the deer's back leg and dragged it up the hill and back into the woods in a matter of seconds. I stood there for a few seconds asking myself if I was losing my mind. Then it dawned on me that that thing knew where I was because of the rifle shot. Had it been watching me? I thought to myself. Realizing that I had been asleep for almost 2 hours with that thing in the same area as me hit me like a truck. This thing was probably twice my size and twice my weight, and I really didn't want to think about what would happen if I ran into it. Until now, I had been frozen and watching. My legs cramped up with post-adrenaline rush and I felt like throwing up. I looked at my stuff still all over the ground and decided to leave it, hightailing it down those same log trails that I had came up on. I finally made it back down to my truck and left, not knowing what had just happened. When I got back, no one was home, so I got back in my truck and drove over to my uncle's house to tell him what I had seen. When I got there, I ran through the door, startling him and my aunt. I sat down, and he could see that I was physically shaken up. I told him, but of course he tried to rationalize with me and said it was probably just a bear. Time went on and I didn't think about it too much. I got married, had 2 sons, and starting driving a semi-truck to provide for my family. One night about 15 years later, I was coming back from a 2-week-long trip to California and back, and I was only about 50 miles from home when I passed another truck driver who looked about 20 years older than me. He flashed his lights to let me know that I was good to get back over, and I hopped on the CB radio to say thanks and be polite. He responded and we just got talking until we found out we grew up in the same area. We both liked hunting and talked about it for a while, and I told him that I had hunted in Panther Creek, West Virginia a lot when I was younger. He was silent for a moment until he responded with, "Yeah. Me and my wife used to drive through there looking for deer all the time until we saw something that made me never go back." I asked what he had seen, feeling that dread I had felt so long ago in the woods. He was hesitant because he didn't think I'd believe him. I finally convinced him, and this is what he told me. Me and my wife were driving up there one night down some old back road before my kids were born, looking for deer, and we rounded a corner. My headlights caught something on the other side of the road on top of the bank. I stopped to see what it was, but before we could even stop, it jumped out in front of us. I slammed on my brakes and stopped only about 5 yards in front of it. It was a big hairy animal that looked like a big gorilla. It had red fur that was tangled and messy. It looked at me and my wife and screamed at us. It was so loud that we both jumped out of shock. And just like it had jumped out, it ran down the bank on the other side of the road. "We hauled ass out of there and we haven't been back since," he said. I was shocked. I hadn't told him my story, so there's no way he was messing with me. Another few years had passed when my uncle called me. I answered and he said, "They're looking for your Bigfoot." I was confused and angry that he was still teasing me about this after so many years had passed. I asked him what he meant and told him to stop teasing me about it, and he said, "You serious, buddy? That TV show, Finding Bigfoot, is in Panther Creek right now looking for it." I didn't even know what to say. Part of me hoped something was found so I wouldn't be ridiculed anymore, but part of me hoped they didn't run into whatever I did. My dad told me this story even when I was very little. He still tells me today, and I'm 21 now, so I don't think he's just messing around with me. He absolutely swears on his life that this is a true story. He doesn't believe in Bigfoot, but he definitely doesn't know what he saw that morning. Next story. I helped a movie character. The story I'm about to tell you sounds crazy, but I assure you it happened. To start off, I am currently 15 and I was home alone for most of the night this night. This happened last month. I was sitting in the room of my house, which I call the pet room, because needless to explain, it is where my animals live. I was watching my current favorite movie, Jurassic World. It was probably about 2:30 in the morning. The movie was currently on my very least favorite scene, the scene where Claire's assistant, Zara, gets killed. I always hated that scene. I felt bad for Zara. Just as it ended, I decided to turn the TV off and go get a snack. I was standing looking out my kitchen window into the backyard when I noticed his small, human-like silhouette laying in the grass. I shook my head thinking it's probably nothing until I saw it move. I know for sure at this point that I'm actually seeing it. It appeared to be a person who looked to be wounded. I stood there for a moment, contemplating whether I should go out and check, and my kind-hearted, mum-like personality self decided to go. I put on my flip-flops and walked out the back door. I approached what now appeared to be a woman, laying in the grass, crying quietly, "Are you okay?" I stumbled over my words. I was close enough now to tell she shook her head, indicating that she was not okay. I began to walk faster, hoping and praying it wasn't a weird trap of some sort. But as I got close, I was absolutely horrified. I shined my flashlight on her face, and I immediately recognized her. I kid you not, it was Zara from the movie I was just watching. I know this sounds crazy, but I know for sure it was her. I'm mildly obsessed with that movie, and I know what she looks like well. There were claw marks and cuts all over her shoulders, presumably from pteranodon claws, and she was soaking wet. She smelled like a mixture of salt water and blood. I crouched down beside her and laid my hand on her arm. I asked again if she was okay, and she again indicated to me that she was not. I knew I needed to get her inside and try to figure out what to do. It was probably around 60 degrees that night and pouring rain. "I'm going to try and lift you, okay?" I said soothingly as possible. She simply nodded and tried to help me lift her up. For a grown woman, and me being only 15, not the strongest person in the world, she was surprisingly light. I carried her in the house and laid her on my bed. She was freezing and I wanted to try to warm her up. I went to my parents' bathroom and grabbed a bottle of peroxide, some gauze pads, a thermometer, and a few towels. I came back out, she was laying in the bed, shivering. Having several baby cousins, even though I'm 15, I have a bit of a mothering brain, and I like helping people, so automatically I felt bad. I laid one towel on top of her and the other under her shoulders and back so I could pour peroxide over the cuts. I did the peroxide after I wiped some of the blood away with using a few gauze pads. I warned her that it would probably hurt, and she simply nodded. I also told her to squeeze my hand if it hurt too bad, and she nodded in response to that as well. The very second the liquid touched her shoulders, she got a complete death grip on my arm, and honestly it scared me a little. But I was used to being clung to, because like I said, I have a lot of young cousins, and I'm typically a pretty comforting person. After I finished with the peroxide, she was sobbing and holding onto my arm. I'm usually pretty good at comforting people, but this was slightly awkward considering one thing. I wasn't even sure if this is real. I'm way worse at comforting adults, more or less people I do not know, than I am children. All I could pull off was a bit of shushing and rubbing her arm, which to my shock seemed to help. I then put the thermometer in her ear gently, and it read 65 degrees. "I'm gonna go and turn the heat up," I said, as I gently pulled myself from her grip and walked out of the room. I turned the heat up to about 75. This is way too hot for me, as I prefer to be kind of cold, but I knew I needed to get her warmed up. And I was kind of cold at the moment too, from being out in the rain. When I got back, I just stood there staring at her, contemplating what to do next. I wasn't sure when my parents were going to be home, and I was unsure how they would react to this. I asked if she wanted me to turn on the TV, to which I got a small nod. I switched it to Mama's Family, hoping something funny would lighten the mood. "This okay?" I asked. She nodded again. I was so confused as to what was happening. I was sitting here in the bedroom with a fictional movie character. I was sure I was going crazy. But I was also sure I wasn't dreaming. Typically, in my dreams, something crazy that didn't make sense at all would have happened by now. Yes, I know this whole thing didn't make sense, but everything that was happening seemed logical, like the typical dream nonsense. I sat on the bed beside her. There was about 30 minutes of silence until she finally said, in the British accent that I know so well from my favorite movie, "Thank you." I smiled at her and nodded. I then decided to text my mom and ask her what time they were going to be home. I really didn't want them to see her. She replied that they will be home in about 3 hours. I breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that I had a while. I still decided not to wait until the last minute and to move her to the pet room. I helped her into the room and she laid on the bench beside the window. Fast forward to the next morning. I had fallen asleep on the floor beside the bench, and I woke up realizing that she was still there. I knew for sure it hadn't been a dream now. I looked out the window and my parents were home. I was praying they hadn't looked in here and realized that I had another person here with me. After she woke up, she quietly whispered, "I have to get back to the park." I assumed she was talking about Jurassic World. "You sure you're up for it?" I asked. She nodded and sat up. Just then I turned toward the door and was absolutely shocked. It was Claire Deering herself. I almost choked on air. She walked over to me and said, "Thanks for helping my assistant." All I could do was nod and sit there in complete shock. She helped Zara up, hugged her. Zara smiled at me, thanked me again. And with that, they both vanished. To this day, I am confused as to how this is possible. But I know what I saw. And I know I wasn't dreaming. I know the story isn't really that scary. It's leaning more towards the amazing side. I have never told any of my family because I know they would not believe me. And even though this isn't necessarily a scary story, I just wanted to share it. The only person besides you guys that I have ever told this story to is my best friend. I hope you enjoy this story, and thanks for listening. Next story. Complete silence. As of writing this experience just ended around an hour ago, and I really am still in shock. So please bear with me if I mess up my writing. I am a night owl. I love staying up until midnight most of the time, and I wake up at around 6 a.m. without any drowsiness or problems. After I wake up, I use a hallway to get to my kitchen where I make coffee and eat my meals. My house is essentially shaped like a T with a small protrusion in the back where one of the bathrooms is located. The living room is directly below the perpendicular area where the two lines of the T meet. I would also like to note that I regularly wake up in the night to get water. Last night was just like the rest. I stayed up reading and doom scrolling in my room. I put my phone on its charger and then went to bed. At around 2 a.m. I woke up suddenly. The ambient music I usually had playing in the background was silent. My clock was stopped at around 1:40 a.m. I didn't really think anything of it. That was until I went to refill my water. When I walked down the hallway that led to the kitchen, I noticed something. It was completely and utterly silent. I then opened the front door of my house and I heard nothing from the woods either. I didn't hear any cars coming and going on the road nearby as they usually did at this hour. There was just no sound. I turned to head back inside and then realized that the security alarm should have gone off since I didn't disarm it before going outside. I then heard this really low hum like an emergency generator running. I then reopened the front door to see if it actually was running, since it is outside right around the corner of my house. Nothing. At that point, I began to hyperventilate. My heart rate spiked and I felt like I was going to die. It was so quiet, so peaceful, yet there was an air of inevitability, of finality. It felt like these were my last moments. I remember distinctly saying, "Am I dead?" I then began to cry quietly. I was breathing so hard and so fast and was just so desperate for it all to end. The low humming continued, but even that was drowned out by the silence eventually. For some reason, at some point I began feeling very cold. Chills were running up and down my body repeatedly. My crying turned to desperate wailing as I began to accept my end. After that, I completely lost all sense of time and reality in general. It was mental torture. I began to see things, shadows and lights darting around the corners of my eye. At some point, an idea emerged in my mind. I practically fell on my way up the stairs as I went to grab my phone. I was going to set a stopwatch to see if time was passing. I went to the clock app and started a stopwatch. It stayed at 0. That's when I broke. I began screaming for whoever was playing this sick prank to stop. Silence was the only response to all my questions and pleading. At that point, I think I finally realized the definition of the word silence. Finally, I gave up, resorting to surrender. I began to fall into shock, my gaze fixed on nothing, becoming increasingly blurred as ringing began in my ears. At some point, I dozed off, huddled in a corner of the living room, completely numb, all hope lost. When I woke up, I saw the sun rising over the horizon as my music was playing in my bedroom. I almost began crying with joy as I marveled at the sound of birds chirping happily in the forest surrounding my house. And that leads me to the current moment. As I'm writing these very words, I am just so terrified. What happened? How long was I asleep? What caused this? I'm still questioning my existence at the moment, so I think I'll just post this and go outside and walk around and listen to the woods that are no longer silent. Next story, therefore, it follows. I am a social worker assigned to work within a bustling downtown public library in a West Coast city. My clients are primarily unhoused individuals, and I work closely with dozens of them throughout the week during the library's open hours. I began my career as an intern in the social work program while attending the nearby state university, working under a field instructor at the same library location while I earned my Bachelor of Social Work degree. I decided to continue serving clients at this location after graduating and have been assigned there for the past 2 years. I would like to preface this account with an acknowledgement that, given the sensitive nature of our line of work, maintaining anonymity is essential. Therefore, I will provide only the minimal amount of details about the client involved to respect their privacy and ensure confidentiality. With that being said, I begin my strange tale. The incident in question occurred during my time as a social work intern. I admit that I was inexperienced and took on more than I could handle. In those early days, I suffered from what one might call job creep, as my efforts as an eager, ambitious student steadily shifted into other responsibilities that went beyond my assigned duties. After entering the program and being unceremoniously thrust into the field at the library, I formed an attitude of subservience to my career. This manifested as working longer hours than I should have, sacrificing my health and well-being daily, all with the belief that I was living up to some sort of martyred state of being. In some ways, this could be interpreted as both self-destructive and somewhat egocentric. I am still very passionate about what I do, but I realize now, following the events that occurred more than 2 years ago, how important it is to recognize when I am crossing a line and need to move away from playing hero, because in this case it almost got me hurt. Or worse, I'm getting a bit ahead of myself here. The social work program at the library is a critical service for many of its unhoused patrons. The library itself is an essential third space for the community, especially in the brutal heat of summer when the temperatures hit triple digits, and the merciless onset of winter when it dips well below freezing at night. My clients' cases vary greatly. For example, some seek assistance with housing or obtaining access to healthcare, while others request mental health services, counseling, or employment guidance. Demand for social workers is consistently high, and appointments are often fully booked. However, at certain times of the day, walk-ins can be accommodated. Our small office is located on the 4th floor of the library, which is a busier part of the library as there is also a computer lab and ample seating for patrons to rest and utilize the library's space. Library staff perform a lot of the heavy lifting and are vital in fielding our clients' requests for appointments and also guiding them towards seeking our services during our walk-in hours. One night, on a bitterly cold evening in early December, a few days before our winter break, all of the interns, including me, were looking forward to closing up the office. It was nearing the end of a long, albeit productive day. After the other interns left, our site supervisor told me she was headed upstairs to file away some documents and then would be heading home. I stayed behind to finish organizing a thick stack of paperwork from my last client, I was deep in concentration, sifting through forms that all began to meld into a blurred mass when I was interrupted by a knock at the door. One of the library assistants, a quiet young woman whose name I could never recall, opened the door and asked if I had time to see one more walk-in. She then added in a soft voice that the request seemed urgent. Being the overachieving intern that I was, I agreed to see the client. The client was a young woman who would not provide me with her age, but was most likely in her late teens or early 20s. She had a dog with her, an older medium-sized pup who was well behaved and stuck closely to her side. When she entered the office, I immediately sensed a strong amount of tension radiating from her, as if she was inwardly coiled into a tight ball, ready to snap out of place at any moment. At first, she refused to make eye contact with me, electing instead to peer around the room. It appeared that she was gauging the level of danger of the space. I was not surprised at all by her behavior. It's something I see every day. Many young women living on the streets encounter horrors that most of us will never know. My initial impression of her was that she had seen many terrible things, encountered the worst kind of humanity daily, and did not trust a single person. After inviting her to take a seat at the table in the corner of the office and taking the chair opposite her, I introduced myself and asked for her name. She muttered her first name, which I will not disclose. I will instead refer to her going forward as Jill. As for her dog, I will also protect his privacy and call him Jack. I began our conversation by running through the standard intake form I complete with every client at the beginning of our consultation. It covers general questions regarding our client's personal history, contact information, and current needs. It's a very standard, somewhat impersonal form, and I typically try to breeze through it as quickly as possible to get to the heart of the client's needs. Namely, I want to know what brings them to us. How can we help? Jill did not want to provide me with much information up front, and she avoided answering many of the questions during the intake. Her eyes darted back and forth around the room and often fell to the open doorway behind me. I kept thinking, was she seeing something that I couldn't, or watching for someone to burst from around the corner? "So, Jill," I said with a smile, setting my clipboard on the table with the mostly empty intake form, "what brings you in today?" Jill paused her scanning of the room and doorway to look at me, her deep-set eyes settling on mine. I noticed that there were dark grey circles under her eyes. It looked like she hadn't slept at all in days. She bent down and pulled Jack into her lap, who happily obliged her and licked the bottom of her chin. "Something is following me," she murmured, and at first I thought I had misheard her. "I'm sorry, did you say that someone is following you?" I asked, opting for the possibility that I had misinterpreted what she said. "No," she said, and looked away for a moment, lost in thought. "Something," she finally repeated, and met my eyes again. I felt my smile waver slightly and fought to keep my eyebrows from furrowing. I'm often told I wear my heart on my sleeve, and this night I was struggling to keep my confusion from showing. She studied me, seeming to take my silence as an invitation to continue. I noted inwardly that she was very brave given her apparent emotional state. Something had rattled her to her core, but she felt like it was important to talk about it. "I have a good friend out here," she began quietly. "She says her name is Jem, but I know that isn't her real name. We've been friends since I got here, about a year ago. We met at the library. When she's around, she watches my back and I watch hers. She has a tent, and we sometimes sleep in the park or at the river, taking turns, so one of us can keep a lookout." She paused for a moment and swallowed hard, and then moved to set Jack back down on the ground. It seemed that at this point, even her dog would not be able to offer her comfort. I could sense her anxiety radiating off of her. It was so palpable. About a week ago, we were at the river late at night. A little while after I went to sleep in the tent, Jem woke me up. She was freaked out and shaking. She told me that she saw something she couldn't explain, off past the field in the shadows of the trees. She kept pointing at it, but my vision is bad at night, and I couldn't see anything that far away. She wanted to leave right then, so we did. Packed up everything and walked to that park on the edge of town. Jem told me she wasn't going to be able to sleep and that she'd stay up and keep watching. Jill paused for a breath and then shivered slightly. Whatever it was that Jem saw, it followed us. A few hours later, right before sunup, she woke me up again and said it was back, and pointed at it when I came out of the tent. "Did you see it, whatever it was?" I asked. "No," she replied, and scrunched up her eyebrows as if frustrated. "No, it couldn't see it at all. Not that night, at least." Jill looked like she was on the verge of tears and continued. "No, at first, I couldn't see it." And Jack here kept right on sleeping, so I thought maybe Jem was on something, hallucinating or dreaming. But the way she described it scared me. What did she say it looked like? I pressed on gently as I could, my curiosity piqued. She said it wasn't a person. She said it was crawling and walking, like it could stand, but just for a second. But it mostly moved like a cat, sort of. A tall cat that could stand up on its back legs. It would go back and forth between standing and crawling, really fast-like. And it stayed out of the light. After that, she barely slept at all for days. At night, she stayed awake outside the tent, waiting for it to show up. And when it did, she would wake me up, and we would move to another spot. It made me afraid. Did it ever come close to you? I asked. Jill shook her head. After a few nights, Jem told me she didn't want to sleep out in the open anymore. She said she wanted to sleep somewhere inside, like in an abandoned building or even in the tunnels. The tunnels, I thought grimly to myself. The tunnels were a sprawling underground network of passageways that lay beneath the city, which were largely inaccessible, except to thrill-seeking tour groups or those desperate enough to seek shelter within their catacomb-like depths. I told her I didn't want to do that, Jill said, her voice wavering. I don't like the tunnels. I hear that all sorts of horrible things happen there to people like me. She finished, her voice trailing off. So what happened after that? I asked. Jem got upset with me, told me that it was stupid to stay outside with that thing following us. Though at that time, I still didn't see it. So she left. She said after the third night that she had had enough. She would take her stuff and stay in the tunnels at night, and that I could either come with her or not. You decided not to go with her? Yeah, I still didn't completely believe something was following us. I didn't think she had any reason to lie to me. I thought she was just being paranoid. I thought what she was doing was dangerous, holding up in the tunnels like that. People disappear there, she said, and then looked up at me. I haven't seen her since, she said, and I saw tears begin to well in her eyes. I usually see her around here, in the library during the day, or at least at the park in the mornings when the church groups give out meals. I think something's happened to her. Something bad. I think whatever that thing is, it got to her. A chill ran down my spine, even though I was having a difficult time believing this myself. I could tell Jill had been through a lot out there, and I'm sure so had her friend. But there must have been some sort of rational explanation for this. Have you contacted the police? I suggested. Jill gave me a look like I had suddenly put on a clown costume and pirouetted around the room. Of course, she hadn't contacted the police, a look told me. Like they would be of any help at all. They don't care about the unhoused. My chest tightened at the stark truth of that notion. Have you tried staying in the shelters? There's a women's shelter a few blocks from here. I know it's full at the moment, but I'm happy to get you on the wait list, I offered, attempting to steer her towards a path that involved something I could help her with as a social worker. I don't stay in shelters. Bad things happen there too, she replied solemnly. I nodded, understanding exactly what she was saying without the need for her to spell it out. Even though shelters, which the name implies, grant some semblance of protection from the outside, they are also notorious for not always offering protection on the inside. I've heard many horror stories from my clients and fellow social workers, and some people choose to avoid them and stay out in the elements instead. Finally, after some deliberating to myself while Jill sat there, mulling over her thoughts, I asked her, Are you interested in housing assistance? There is a housing choice voucher program.
I am happy to walk you through signing up for that, or I began, but she cut me off. No, I don't want any of that. I don't want to stay here. I can't stay here, she said, and then blew out a big sigh.
As if she was holding her breath for a few moments and forgot she needed to breathe. I've seen it, she said.
Her voice so low I could barely hear her. You've seen it? I said slowly, now unsure of where this would lead us. Yes, she replied.
Last night.
I saw it near the old part of town, by the bridge. I was looking for Jem over there.
There's an opening that leads to the tunnels next to the docks. Jem showed me once. I thought I'd check near there to see if I could spot her, or her tent, but when I got close to the river, I saw it.
Off by the walkway under the bridge. I looked at her with my eyebrows raised.
I'm sure she could sense my doubt. I swear to you, she said, obviously exasperated with me. It was exactly like how Jem described it. It was slinking around cat-like, but too big to be any cat. It was dark, so it was kind of hard to see, but it was close enough for me to see it this time. It was skinny and very tall. At first, it was standing up, and I think it spotted me, and then it fell to the ground and crawled on all fours, moving straight towards me. I was holding on to Jack, and he began to bark like crazy and tried to jump out of my arms. I wasn't going to wait for it to get us. We got the hell out of there. And after I ran a few blocks and ducked into an alley, a few hours later, I saw it again. It followed me. It was in one of the alleyways across from where I was, slinking around, watching me from the dark places where it was hard to see it. But I knew it was there, just as sure as Jem was sure that it was there.
That, and Jack was growling when his hackles were up, she said, and bent down to scratch behind his ears. I found myself shaking my head, finding this all very hard to digest.
A strange creature stalking this young woman and her friend. I've heard plenty of unusual tales during the short time I was in the internship program, but this one was by far the most bizarre. It sounded like something straight out of a B-movie horror movie.
And not at all based in reality. Jill, I want to help you. I truly do.
But I don't know how I can help in my capacity as a social worker. I need help getting out of here.
I can't stay here. It's going to get me like it got Jem, she said. Her despondency made clear through the falling intonation of her voice. I'll see what I can do. I've helped others get bus passes.
But where would you go? I have an aunt who lives along the coast up north. If I get there, I know she'd take me in, Jill explained. I will try, but I can't guarantee that I can help. To square away the funding through our program for something like that, I'd have to get special approval from my site supervisor. Jill looked at me with pure desperation, which washed over her features. Please, you're the only person who can help me get out of here.
I'm scared about what might happen to me. Please, I sighed, holding Jill's gaze.
Okay, Jill, I'll do my best. After some gentle persuading, I was able to get Jill to provide me with the number for her cell phone. She said it sometimes died because of a faulty battery, but then assured me she would do her best to keep it charged and close to her. I told her I would speak to my site supervisor the next morning and call Jill to update her about the bus ticket. I then asked her about what she planned to do that night, where she intended to stay. I'm not sleeping at all tonight. I'm just going to keep moving, was Jill's grave reply, as she picked up Jack and made her way out of the office. At that, an uncomfortable anxiousness began to settle in the pit of my stomach, and I genuinely felt worried for her. The next morning, prior to diving into our first round of appointments for the day, I pulled my site supervisor aside and explained Jill's situation to her in very general terms. Of course, I kept out the part about the strange creature she claimed was following her, but I managed to frame her situation into a believable story about being followed, her friend disappearing, and her wanting to leave the city immediately to reconnect with family elsewhere. Upon hearing my explanation, my site supervisor shook her head and told me that the social work program for the library was already facing budget cuts, and securing the funding needed for a bus ticket, especially for that amount, would not be feasible. She told me the best we could provide were regional transit day passes, but that was the extent of what we could offer through our program. After talking to my supervisor, The library opened, and I was inundated with appointments, which kept me busy up until my lunch hour. After lunch, I had a brief lull in appointments and took the opportunity to call Jill to let her know about the bus passes. The call went to voicemail, and I left a message explaining to Jill about her limited options. I didn't think much about it after that, until a couple of hours later, when, during an appointment with another client, I received a phone call from Jill. As I stepped away from the client to take the call, I could hear the telltale sounds of heavy traffic in the background, and Jill sounded out of breath. "It's Jill," she said. It sounded like she had been crying, and her voice was breaking as she spoke. "Hey Jill, I left you a message, but I wasn't able to get you a bus ticket."
Our funding has been... I started, and Jill cut me off. "It came back," she said.
And I could tell from her tone that she was frightened beyond belief. "It came back last night."
"And Jack ran away," she continued, and started crying. Static began to come through the phone. "Oh no," I replied. "Jill, I'm so sorry." "I'm going to find him." And then static out here. "Jill, did you hear me? I wasn't able to get the ticket." I'm going, "Static. Tunnels. I can't. Static. Saw him, that thing." She rambled.
And it started to become more and more difficult to understand what she was saying through the buzzing noise. "Jill, if you can hear me, wait for me in Old Town near the entrance. Do not go into the tunnels. I'll meet you there and I'll help you find Jack." I heard myself say the words, and my heart began to pound furiously in my chest as I realized what I was doing, what I was getting myself into. "Jill, please wait for me."
"I'll be there after the library closes," I said.
And then, after a short period of hearing nothing but the crackling sounds of static, the line disconnected. Although I tried calling her back, she did not pick up again. The rest of the day, I was on edge and very worried about Jill. I was afraid she didn't hear me and would attempt to find Jack herself without waiting for me.
I feared that something would happen to her.
About an hour before the end of my shift, as the light outside began to wane, I went to my site supervisor and told her that I needed to leave early for an urgent matter. After hastily packing up my belongings and exiting the library, I headed in the direction of Old Town, which was about 5 blocks away. Along the way, I decided to take a slight detour and pull money out of the ATM for Jill's bus ticket, committing to the idea that I was helping someone who otherwise would receive no help, who may end up hurt, missing, or worse, because no one else would give the time of day to someone in her situation. Again, that job creep reared its head, but I knew it was what I had to do. By the time I reached the entrance to Old Town, dusk had already settled across the city, and the shadows of the old buildings began to stretch and fill in the spaces where the light could no longer reach. I looked around for Jill, hopeful that it would be as easy as her hearing what I said on the phone and waiting there. But, of course, that was not the case. I stood at the archway that was adjacent to the wide underpass that connected the modern part of the city to Old Town. It was a weekday, and the usual crowds of tourists were not there. There were very few people scattered around the area, some couples casually holding hands as they headed off for a quiet dinner. But for more than an hour, there was still no sign of Jill. It was now completely dark outside, and almost half an hour past the time that I told her to meet me at the entrance. I contemplated taking a look around the storefronts or poking my head into some of the alleyways that were scattered throughout. As I was peering around and thinking about my next steps, I spotted him. Jack. He was far away, but I recognized him instantly. He was running full speed down the street a block to the south in the direction of the river. I took off after him, my work bag slamming against my side as I jogged to catch up. By the time I reached the end of the street, where it dead-ended into the beginnings of the docks that lined that side of the river, I could hear frantic yipping coming from underneath the bridge. It was coming from the area closest to the river, where the darkness was thickest and obscured the view of the walkways. I followed the sounds of the dog, and after a moment of panicked searching, attempting to pinpoint the exact location of Jack, I found him. He was underneath one of the tall docks next to the bridge, his small form shaking from the force of his barking. He looked to be facing a shadowy area that led into a dark space I could not distinguish from that angle. I made my way closer to the docks and turned down a ramp that appeared to lead to where he was. While on the ramp, I lost sight of him for a moment. That's when I heard a blood-curdling yelp, and Jack suddenly went silent. "Jack!" I cried out and ran over to the area where I last saw him. He wasn't there, and all I could see was an inky, depthless opening that looked to have once been boarded up, but the boards had been removed and unceremoniously scattered around. This was the entrance to the tunnels that Jill told me about.
I realized as I felt my blood pressure rise and could hear the rhythmic thumping of my heartbeat in my ears. I approached the mouth of the tunnel,
debating with myself as to whether I should enter and try to find Jack, or if I should leave and continue my search for Jill. That's when I heard a familiar voice call out from deep within the passage. It sounded far away and was echoing, but I knew it was Jill, and she sounded frantic, like she was struggling against something. Throwing all my fears and thoughts of caution aside, I pulled out my cell phone, shook it to activate the flashlight, and hurried into the tunnel. The ground was uneven, with trash and chunks of rock scattered about. Overhead, the concrete ceiling was cracked and stained with patches of sinister rust-colored spots. The light of my flashlight bounced as I jogged, filling the passageway with disjointed shadows that resembled figures hiding behind the brick columns that lined the walls. The air reeked of mildew and was bitingly cold, and I could see my breath in puffs of mist that obscured my vision. After a moment, I heard Jill again. This time, she let out a distressing yell that sounded like, "No!"
"Jill, where are you?" I cried out, my voice rough from breathing hard. I heard Jill's voice once more,
and she sounded closer, perhaps only 20 or 30 feet away. But with the effect the tunnel had on the acoustics of the space, it was difficult to tell exactly how far away she was and what she was saying. After taking a few more strides forward, I reached a part of the tunnel that opened into a wide space dotted with stone columns and partially torn down walls. The room was so sprawling that past a certain point, all I could see was pitch black beyond the scattered columns surrounding me. Just then, I heard a piercing yip and looked to my right to see Jill huddled on the ground in a heap, facing me, her back pressed against a collapsed brick wall. She was holding Jack protectively in her lap, and there was a small flashlight on the ground next to her, its beam emitting only a waning glow. The light from my phone shone over her form and revealed the horrified expression on her face. She was staring at something in my direction, but looking directly behind me, her face suggesting that she was about to scream. Jack was growling and looking in the same direction as Jill. I followed their gazes and slowly began to turn around, the light of my phone following my movement. When the light settled on the elongated form that towered before me, Jill uttered a blood-curdling scream. Before I could register what stood in front of me, it moved with unnatural speed, dropping to all fours and disappearing behind the column next to me. I shrieked and stumbled backwards, almost toppling over Jill in the process. I caught myself and shone my phone back towards where I last saw the figure, but saw nothing but the column and the eerie shadow that it cast in the light. Jill was hyperventilating and saying, "No, no, no," repeatedly, in a state of absolute terror. Jack still clutched in her arms. "Where is it?" I whispered harshly, mostly to myself, and cast my phone around, frantically searching for any sign of whatever it was that was down there with us. I took a step away from Jill, scanning the space to the right of where I saw the figure disappear, when I heard movement coming from behind the wall where Jill was sitting. I pointed my light at the hole in the crumbling wall where she sat, where a window frame used to be, and at the same time, Jill looked up above her. There, in the hole, leaning out and over Jill, stood the impossibly lean, tall creature, its dreadfully stretched, nebulous face peering over her. A string of drool oozing from the slit that stood in place of its mouth. I could hear a faint hiss emanating from it, and it cocked its head slightly, its long, tangled hair almost brushing the top of Jill's head. We both screamed at the same time, and Jill crawled away from the creature, dragging Jack away and up as she staggered clumsily to her feet. "Run!" I gasped breathlessly, and Jill began to run in the direction of the exit as I looked back at the hole and realized in horror that the creature was gone. I spat out a curse and turned around to follow Jill when something heavy slammed into my leg, making me stumble. I cried out in pain and fear, and then took my work bag and swung it as hard as I could in the direction of the creature, yelling as I did so. The bag connected with it, and the strap broke, sending the bag and its contents sailing across the space. I wasted no time in reorienting myself and took off sprinting in the direction of the tunnel. I could hear Jill crying and stumbling along ahead of me, doing her best to run away in the pitch black. I caught up to her, my light haphazardly shining the way, as we ran full speed down the passageway. I heard the creature behind us emit an unearthly wail, and then heard the sounds of scampering echoing in the direction we came from. After what seemed like ages, I felt the brisk breeze of the outside air, and together, Jill and I emerged from the opening of the tunnel and out near the river. We kept running up the ramp and onto the street of Old Town, where people were still meandering and window shopping in the chilly night air,
oblivious to the ordeal we had just endured a moment ago. We didn't stop running until we reached the brightly lit storefront near the main archway of Old Town. By then,
we were out of breath and panting, including Jack, who was still clutched in Jill's arms. People stared at us as we stood there catching our breaths, and Jill staggered over to a nearby bench and collapsed onto it, setting Jack next to her as she grabbed at her side and rested her head against the wall of the building. We didn't say anything for some time, and I was not sure how to even bring up with her what we had just encountered.
Did that actually happen? What was that thing? Was it even human? A torrent of questions flooded my mind.
Finally, Jill spoke up and told me that she was leaving that night, that she would take a local bus out of the city and figure it out from there. That's when I offered her the cash that I pulled out from the ATM for the bus ticket and told her to use the money to get to her aunt. We didn't talk about what we saw. I think it was because we were too in shock at the moment to fully process what we encountered. We parted ways shortly after that, after I walked with her back to the centre of downtown and waited for her to get on the bus. Before getting on the bus, she thanked me and told me that she would be okay. I don't know exactly what happened to Jill after she left that night. I once received a postcard in my work inbox that was addressed to me, just my first name because I never provided my full name to my clients, with a vibrant photo of a coastal town and picturesque cliffs and cutesy little shops. There was nothing written on the postcard other than my name, but I'd like to think it was from Jill. As for Jen, her missing friend, I didn't have a full name or anything to provide to the police to try to figure out if she was missing or not.
I'll never know what happened to her.
That is the way it goes for many unhoused people who go missing. It is often not reported to the police and they fall into a void, never to be seen again, or if found eventually, it is often in the worst possible way. In retrospect,
while I know I could have handled the situation more professionally,
perhaps Jill would have become another person to disappear with no trace and with no one to care. I hope that my client's story will help shed light on the dangers that are ever present in the often treacherous world that is the life of an unhoused individual. Please, if you have it in you, take it upon yourself to view this story from a place of empathy and compassion. At least that is my hope for you as a reader or listener of this tale.